Hey everyone, nice to see you all in here. So, for today's class, we will talk more about the history of science and how we kind of got to certain assumptions behind science and certain fundamental kind of commitments we have as a scientific community. Um, Now, in order to discuss this stuff, we have to talk about a certain time period in the history of science where there was a rise in this new kind of way of thinking about the world called logical positivism, as you noticed in the reading and in the titles of the reading. So let's just start from the ground up. Now, again, we saw this with Goodman, but more generally, as scientists, we want to be able to distinguish between scientific theories and hypotheses versus theories and hypotheses that are not scientific, right? So, not all theories and hypotheses we come up with are in fact scientific. Oftentimes, we call those non scientific theories or hypotheses pseudoscience. And so the question the logical positivists were asking themselves, and the question we're asking ourselves as well, is what really distinguishes a scientific theory or hypothesis from one that is non scientific? How do we distinguish these two groups? Um, what is it about science? So, what is it about the structure of scientific reasoning that provides for better justification, better justified methods of inquiry? So, why do we give so much attention to science and, not just some random person's theories and hypotheses of how and why the world works? As we're noticing, right, especially since we discussed the scientific uh, revolution last class, one thing people were starting to notice is that this method called science, it seems to give us more accurate theories about reality, more reliable theories, as opposed to other methods of inquiry like religious study or things of that nature. But now that kind of just begs the question, right? What makes science unique? Why? Why is science so good at helping us organize facts about the world? And this is exactly the question the logical positivists, or often called the logical empiricists, these were the questions they were asking themselves between the two world wars. So now this kind of movement called logical positivism, it happened, sorry, it occurs during the rise of Nazi Germany and World War II. So during the rise of Nazi Germany and World War II, there was this group of intellectuals that met in Vienna. They were scientists, so physicists, biologists, chemists, also mathematicians, um, etc., philosophers. So very famous, thinkers during this time, during the rise of World War II, met in Vienna to talk about these deep methodological issues with regards to science, math, and philosophy. Famously, Albert Einstein went to some of these meetings in Vienna, as well as, if you're interested in mathematics, Kurt Gödel, he went to those meetings. Wittgenstein, a famous philosopher, went to those meetings. And again, these meetings that they had were in Vienna, and they concerned um, what makes good science. What kind of method is science such that it is so reliable and it does give us information about the world. So, to make sense of this question that they're asking, you can look here on the board to kind of see what we mean by theories or hypotheses that are scientific versus not. So notice here are some just general examples I jotted down of quote unquote scientific theories or hypotheses. So here's one that comes from Darwin's theory of evolution: organisms' phenotypes, so phenotypes meaning their observed characteristics, are determined by this process called natural selection, as well as random gene mutation. Okay, this is a scientific theory, and it's really just the statement of the scientific theory of Darwin's theory of evolution. Here's another scientific, hypothesis: water conducts electricity. Okay, good. Another one: one cause of psychosis. So when someone has psychotic symptoms, one cause, not the only cause, but one cause, is too much dopamine in the brain. So here's another scientific hypothesis. Now compare these scientific hypotheses in green to the non-scientific ones in black. Let me start with the second one. So the cause of psychosis in individuals, it's not by means of too much dopamine or something else observable like that. Instead, the cause is the devil. Or anyone with mental illness, it's not due to their brain or the way they're raised. It's because people with mental illness are unethical. That's a non-scientific theory or hypothesis. Notice it still is a theory or hypothesis because it's an attempted explanation for some observable phenomenon, namely that we observe people who have psychosis in the world, that we observe people who have mental illness in the world, and we observe how that mental illness affects the way they act. But now the idea is that these hypotheses that are attempting to explain these things we're observing in the world, they're not scientific. They're not scientific in the way these ones are. Astrology is another example. So astrology was an example we saw in our book as well, where again, strictly speaking, astrology is not scientific, right? Um, and one reason is because oftentimes the predictions that come out of astrology are so vague and generalized that really they can serve to support anyone's type of personality. So, just for concreteness, here is my horoscope for today, July 14th, as a Pisces. Okay, it says, some kind of settlement, grant, or bonus that you've been anticipated for a long time may finally show up. Pisces, this should make your day. You may want to celebrate a chance to attend a large social gathering that might come your way. Have fun. Tonight, don't be surprised if vivid dreams, some great, some sad, come your way. Keep a notebook and pen by your bed so you can write them down. Okay, the reason why I'm reading my horoscope for today is notice how generalized these predictions are. Some bonus or grant or settlement, I mean, that can pertain to almost anyone. You got a little extra money or you settled an argument faster than you thought you would. Um, Notice that that could really apply to any person on any given day. And so, one thing we're noticing is what makes a hypothesis or theory scientific versus not scientific is the specificity of the predictions the theory makes. Now, also, what we're noticing is if the hypothesis or the theory concerns something that we can't observe, it's unobservable, we can't, see it or intuit it via our five senses, then also that scientific hypothesis or theory is now considered non-scientific. So these are all non-scientific because either they're positing something unobservable, like the devil, or something that's extremely hard to quantify and observe, like a moral failure, or like in the astrology case, they make such generalized, vague predictions. It's unclear that it's unclear that these predictions that are later, I guess, found to be true, that they are specific enough for us to assume that, yeah, astrology, that's a scientific theory that actually predicts very specific, concrete things about human nature. So here's an example to just see, okay, examples of scientific versus non-scientific theories and hypotheses. And like we said, we're just going to ask these questions about like what distinguishes the two and why. And these are the exact same questions the logical positivists ask themselves. And so now I'm going to turn our attention a little bit to just the chat and the history of the logical positive movement in science, mathematics, and philosophy. So I'm going to type some of this up now in the chat. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Let me get this going. So a little bit about this movement called logical positivism. Little historical detail. Okay, so logical positivism was this movement in the academic world, the academic community, whether it be in science and pure mathematics and logic, philosophy, et cetera, where it started in the Vienna Circle, where again, very notable mathematicians, scientists, and philosophers would meet to talk about methodology. More specifically, there were some very notable philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists who attended these meetings. More specifically, Kurt Gödel, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Albert Einstein were all members. So really, it was just this group of scientists, and during the start, in the midst of World War II, they were getting together because they wanted to understand how, most generally, we get truths about the world. Now, this quest to determine truths about the world, it wasn't just motivated by purely epistemic or purely knowledge-based reasons. Now, obviously, all these people I mentioned, they're academics. They care about truth. They care about what really is the case. That's all fine. But there's something in addition to what was going on with the logical positivist movement in science and in philosophy. Namely, think again a little more clearly about what time period this took place. What time period? What was going on in the world? What was going on historically? Well, I just mentioned to you, it was kind of during the time of the rise of Nazi Germany and, later led to the Second World War. Okay? And so, another thing I would like to note is a lot of the members of the Vienna Circle, these logical positivists, either they themselves were Jewish or they themselves were academics and therefore targets of Nazi Germany. And given this fact, the scientists who attended this group called the Vienna Circle, just as interested as they are in understanding the world and getting facts and truths about the world, they also found that their participation in these meetings was a form of political activism. So they saw kind of the important overlap between the proper reasoning skills a good scientist has and how that's important when it comes to living in a society. So let me put this now in the chat. Okay, so the logical positivists, again, these group of academics, which included Einstein at times, they found their project not just to be a search for truth, as I mentioned, they thought of it also as a form of political activism. Now, why? I mean, what is the search for truth and knowledge about the world, whether through physics or philosophy or through mathematics? Um, how could this possibly be a form of political activism? Well, one thing the positivists noticed is that, remember, the historical backdrop, Nazi Germany, they're understanding that people, most generally, seem to be somewhat easily manipulated and controlled into believing things that are not only false, but that are just so vile and, morally reprehensible. Okay. So, really, the logical positivist movement started with a lot of Jewish people or people who did not agree with the Nazi regime, and they would meet to search for truth. And this was supposed to be kind of a counterbalance to the politics of Nazi Germany, where everything, a German was fed information wise, was just further propaganda to support Hitler. Okay. And so the idea here is this. Okay. So if you're still like, what does being good at science have anything to do with, sorry, something political? Well, here's one thing. The logical positivists had issues with what was going on in Nazi Germany, not obviously because of how atrocious and unethical everything was, but also the following. They thought that the enemy of truth and knowledge, whether it's in science or philosophy or mathematics, the enemy of truth and knowledge is vagueness. Vagueness in the way we speak, vagueness in the way we think. And if we're unclear on what our own thoughts and values are, well, you now will be the type of person susceptible to doing bad, evil things. So they saw, for example, the logical positivists, they noticed how easily people could be manipulated into believing things that are not only false, but are just horrible, morally reprehensible, and vile. Like, for example, that Jewish people are of a lower status. Okay? They wanted to kind of combat the Nazi propaganda by illustrating to the masses that it's just propaganda. There's no real truth behind a lot of these claims being made. Okay, so that was kind of their political motivation to better define the precise methodology of what we call science. Okay. Now, you might be wondering, what is this term logical positivism, or what I'm saying often as logical empiricism? So let me put this in the chat. What is this view? Like, what are they talking about? What are they agreeing upon? What are they disagreeing upon in the Vienna Circle? Well, let me put it to you like this. The logical positivists, they were committed to following this idea that science uniquely gives us facts about the world, because science does not speak on things that are non-observable, like angels and demons and et cetera, et cetera. And as the positivists claim, the only sentences that we articulate every single day, me and you, in everyday language, the only ones that have true meaning are those that are that concern some observable feature of the world. So now notice the positivists are making kind of this linguistic distinction. Let me show you this. Sorry, okay, there we go. Get another pen out. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. Okay. So here we go again. What were the logical positivists or empiricists? What were they committed to? What's the view? What's the position? Well, as I just mentioned, the logical positivists were committed to the following idea that science uniquely gives us facts about the world because science does not speak on anything non observable. This should remind you of what assumption behind science? Physicalism, right? Because we only have access to the world around us by means of our physical senses, then we must also assume that our physical senses are perhaps our most reliable guide to better understanding the world. Okay? So now you might think to yourself, well, what are the types of sentences that actually have meaning? And what are the types of sentences that don't? Because again, the logical positivist thinks that sentences that lack a clear observation based meaning will uniquely give us facts about the world, and that, you know, hypotheses or statements that don't conform to this, that's not real science. Okay? So now let's talk a little bit about statements that are directly observable, that, I could prove to you right now if you were in my office. For example, I am sitting on a chair. Okay, notice what's the criterion that helps us decide whether the hypothesis is true or false? It's our observations, right? Or how about I'm wearing a purple sweater right now? Okay, all of you know that's false because you can observe me right now on Zoom, and what you notice is I'm not wearing purple. Okay? Now, the second class of statements, the statements that have to do with what we actually observe in the world, those ones are the ones the logical positivists are interested in, not the kind of high and mighty, free flowing type of philosophy that was very much popular prior to the scientific revolution. Okay. Here's another example of a good scientific hypothesis. When conducting hundreds of observations, scientists noticed that female guppies are more attracted to male guppies with red color patches, since the red coloration signals to the female that the male is healthy. So here's another example that fits within Darwin's theory of evolution. Okay, so let me now ask this question. Okay. So according to the logical positivists, here's our question. What types of sentences can be confirmed or supported or rejected observationally? Because again, we have to ensure that whatever we come to accept or reject, um, we're doing so with what is the best evidence we can observe. Okay? And so the logical positivists wanted to make this crystal clear because during this time there were still a lot of folks that found, things like religion to be the final source of all aspects of reality and knowledge. Okay? So let's see. Now, we just talked about statements that are found to be true given the number of times we've observed that thing. We also just discussed how um, we also noticed how, um, that how science uniquely gives us facts about the world, unlike religion, because in science we don't have to tolerate the idea that we will never observe or perfectly understand the reasons for how and why something is the case. Okay? Um, Now, as I mentioned, what types of statements are meaningful according to the positivists? So statements that concern the world. Okay, so now according to the logical positivists, this is more or less an exhaustive list of what they were interested in and what they found to be the proper methodology for these various areas of inquiry. So, again, according to the logical